Welcome to EWTN's live coverage, this ongoing coverage on the Interregnum period. We have mourned Pope Francis with different memories, remembering his gestures, and we're going to now talk about his legacy. My name is Paula Riaza. I am Vatican correspondent for EWTN Noticias, and I am joined by my two co-hosts, Dr. Matthew Bonson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Welcome, Matthew.
Good to be with you.
And Monsignor Roger Landry, of course, National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies. We were just talking about this legacy. Pope Francis has done wonderful gestures. We were speaking about those gestures, but let's talk about the doctrine. Let's talk about the documents he left for us.
It was a rich pontificate following two of the greatest teachers in the history of the magisterium of the Church, or the teaching authority of the Church. But Pope Francis himself left us a legacy of 10 major documents. He started with a document called the Light of Faith, which has been called the encyclical written by four hands, because it was written mainly by Pope Benedict as part of a triptych on love was his first document, hope was his second major encyclical, and then the third was on faith, because these are the three things that remain, St. Paul tells us in his first letter to Corinthians. But he wasn't able totally to finish it before he resigned the papacy. And so he entrusted it to Pope Francis. Pope Francis, out of humility, said, this is a document given to us by possibly a future doctor of the Church. He put a few of his own fingerprints on the document and published it under his name. But it was, as he said very plainly, a document written by four hands about the light that we receive from the gift of our faith to be able to see things as they really are, even though we walk by faith and not by sight. But then also about the way our faith is meant to illumine the world, kind of like, if you remember Die Hard, the movie, Die Hard 2, where there was the runway with the lights at night in the middle of a storm, which was the only way planes could land safely. Our faith is like that light. For people to know where they're supposed to go, how to land, how to rise, we need this gift of faith. And that's how he began his pontificate, building literally on the inheritance given to him by Pope Benedict, because popes are not just successors of each other. Barack Obama was a successor, for example, of George Bush, and Donald Trump of Barack Obama, and then Joe Biden and Trump again. They're successors, even though they might not have a lot in common. Popes are not just successors, but inheritors of what has been bequeathed by those who have come before them. So I always thought that to inaugurate a teaching pontificate, you couldn't do better than to share a document with Pope Benedict XVI.
Well, first I have to congratulate you for introducing Die Hard into a conversation about Pope Francis.
And somehow
It all made sense. That's the key part. You could just throw out a random film, but it actually ties into this. Humility. Lumen Fidei demonstrated two aspects of humility for two different popes. I love the fact that Pope Benedict XVI didn't hang around, for example, to finish it, that he didn't want this to be simply a capstone, but instead, in exactly the same way that he had this monumental trust in resigning the papacy, he handed this off to a successor to do whatever he wanted with it. Pope Francis theoretically could have just put it in a drawer and forgotten it as part of a distant legacy. But then you have the humility on the part of Pope Francis to recognize, as you noted, the brilliance of his predecessor, not just to take ownership of it, but to then participate, to share in it, and to combine his thoughts along with Pope Benedict XVI. You mentioned, too, the idea of successors, and I think one of the things that Pope Francis was trying to do with this encyclical was to put his stamp of continuity. There are, and have been throughout this entire pontificate, arguments and debates. Is this a pontificate of continuity? Is this a pontificate of rupture? We can drag in the whole argument about the Second Vatican Council. I think Pope Francis, in embracing Pope Benedict XVI's genius, was making a mark for continuity. That, yes, he's building on the work of his predecessor. The other thing, though, that is especially striking is the fact that Pope Francis soon after then released what was many people consider to be the blueprint of his pontificate. So yes, he made this gesture, embraced the thought of Pope Benedict XVI, but then struck out in his own way to be a teacher in his own right.
The encyclical written by four hands talked about faith as a gift.
Yeah.
And in that second document called Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of faith, Pope Francis said, how can we hold that gift to ourselves?
Right.
That if it really is a gift, if we've really been changed by our faith in Jesus, then we can't keep that to ourselves. We all have the experience St. Paul wrote about to the first Christians in Corinth. Woe to me if I don't share the gospel. He wrote, in I think one of the most beautiful passages of Pontificate, that Jesus makes a difference in our life. We know that walking with Jesus and walking without are totally different. Looking at the world through Jesus' lenses and looking at it through worldly lenses leads us to two different conclusions. And then he gets to the money line of that quotation, that we know, we are convinced that life with Jesus is so much richer, and that is why we evangelize. So the gift of faith is not something that we can selfishly hold to ourselves, but we've got to give it as medicine to the world, as the antidote even to mortality.
Yeah.
And do you think that joy is part of this gift of faith? Because we are seeing several things at the plaza, we're hearing several things at
Yes.
St. Peter's Square, and we just heard a big crowd cheering. So they're not only mourning, they're also cheering, they're sharing the gift of faith. Isn't that what we're seeing?
Well, we had that spontaneous applause today, which is sort of a classic Roman event. We had similar things at John Paul II's monumental funeral in 2005. But one thing, too, that when you were talking about Evangelii Gaudium, the echoes, all pontificates in a way have a blueprint. We can go back to, in particular, John Paul II with Redemptor Homines, the first great encyclical.
The Redeemer of man.
Of man, in which he coined that magnificent phrase that man is a mystery to himself unless he understands himself through Christ. With Evangelii Gaudium,
The joy of the gospel.
the joy of the gospel, Pope Francis is laying out this blueprint for the rest of the pontificate. But there are two things that really linger. The first is you can track from Evangelii Gaudium so many of the themes of the pontificate, going out to the peripheries, a church that must not be closed in on herself, things that we heard for 12 years. But in Evangelii Gaudium too, he's laying down these markers of points of departure for himself in previous pontificates, but developing, again, trying to be in continuity with them. I think Evangelii Gaudium 2, though, is itself an echo, and this is something we're going to have to spend years now thinking about. Back to the Aparecida document. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, that if we're looking for blueprints, his vision for a continental-wide program of evangelization that came out of the meetings of the Central American, of the Episcopal Conferences of Latin America, a prospect for how we evangelize in the modern world. You can see all of that playing out, first in his vision for the Southern Hemisphere, for Latin America, but then he brought that into his vision for the whole church. So the echoes of Aparecida are in Evangelii Gaudium in much the same way that Redemptor Homines then echoed throughout the whole pontificate of John Paul II.
And he gave his I have a dream portion in The Joy of the Gospel, in which he said, I have a dream of a missionary option that's going to revolutionize everything that the church does. So literally everything's got to be put in a missionary key. How are we able to use that food pantry, that religious education program, that parish, that diocese, you name it, in order to be able to share the gift of God with others, the gift of God incarnate in Jesus Christ and the opportunity to receive his love and live in his love. That's what he did for all of Latin America and the Caribbean, and that's what he was trying to do for the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And for me, as the national director of the Pontifical Mission Societies in the U.S., those are our marching orders, right? The whole church doesn't have a mission, Pope Francis says. We are a mission. And Pope Francis wanted each of us to get to the spiritual maturity to say, I don't have a mission. I am a mission on this earth. This is why I exist. From our baptism, and especially by the sacrament of confirmation, we have received tongues of fire. We've received the gift of the Holy Spirit to continue to witness to Jesus Christ in the middle of the world with all the questions that people have today. Pope Francis recognized that about himself, and he similarly recognized it about you and me. And I keep going back to what he said 6 days before he was elected. He spoke to all the cardinals, At the time, in 2013, each of the cardinals was only supposed to speak for 5 minutes. Most were speaking way past the time limit. But he stuck to 4 minutes and 44 seconds. And in his talk, he said, the next pope has to be someone who, from his contemplation and adoration of Christ, from his prayer, in other words, is able to lead the church to the existential periphery, to be a mother living off the sweet, I'm forgetting the substantive that he used, the sweet joy of sharing the faith. And he lived up to that job description all the way to the last day that last full day he had, when he was going out from the Casa Santa Marta in order to share the joy of the gospel on his face, when he couldn't really preach with the same way that he had done before because of his lung issue. He was still preaching the joy of the gospel, just crisscrossing the square and showing that Christ lives, because the successor of St. Peter is a living witness to the fact that there was a Nazarene carpenter who called a Galilean fisherman to put out into the deep, and that fisherman came here and cast his nets in what is now St. Peter's Square.
And Father, sorry, Matthew, it's so interesting what you're saying. I didn't know that story, that he's kept it short, 4 minutes, and it just reflects so much this humility that he has preached by example all the way through his pontificate, but also in his private life in Buenos Aires as an archbishop. And as you know, we were there, we were getting stories, getting to know who Jorge Mario Bergoglio was, and that's something that they highlighted so much, that humility in him. Do you remember any other moment when you've seen this humility, not only in his documents, but in his day-to-day?
Well, for starters, his constant refrain that homily should not be more than, 10 minutes, 5 minutes if you can make...
one part of his pontificate I vigorously disagree with.
Right. But he was adamant about it, the idea that you can lose your audience, so to speak. But the one thing, too, with Francis in Evangelii Gaudium is how he pivoted in a way, but didn't disrupt the concept of the new evangelization, because at the heart is a question: how do we proclaim the gospel in this modern world, in the face of technocracies, in the face of a throwaway culture? He gave his answer, that it has to be the same everywhere, but we're constantly reaching out to the poor. But then he very importantly defined who the poor are. That it isn't simply the people living in the favelas, in the worst parts of poverty in Latin America. It's also those who are spiritually starving in the industrialized cities in the first world.
How do you say we find these people in our day-to-day life, Father?
We don't have to often go out and search for them. They strike us almost everywhere we go. We see so many who are lost. So many are hungering for God without knowing where to turn for true nourishment. So many of the sort of new spiritual movements that people are paying so much money for in some cases, most of that would be met if they just found Christ where they expect to find him, but just haven't found him yet. And that means that we have to be more credible witnesses, from the Pope down to the most newly baptized at the Easter Vigil a few days ago, that all of us show the faith before we preach the faith, because the faith has to be seen with eyes before it's credibly heard with ears. And so I think that that's where we begin. And that was part of the revolution that Pope Francis was trying to lead, that we're not just mouthing our trust in Christ, but we're also letting that take on our body language. And that type of preaching by the way that we live is something that's incontestable.
Yeah, and todos, 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 that it is for everyone. Now, that was often misunderstood. It was sometimes misappropriated by those who tried to expand his vision far beyond anything that he clearly intended, if you actually read his writings. I mean, I think you and I spent, 12 years basically trying to explain to people, no, read the whole paragraph, not just the takeaway quote. That openness to everyone, but that also requires us then to have that openness in our own hearts and our own minds as we proclaim the gospel. He used the phrase, we can't be rigid. Now that's another one of those controversial takeaways that people have at times misunderstood. He used the phrase, for example, that proselytism is such solemn nonsense. That wasn't a rejection of evangelization. It was the method of it.
Proselytism sometimes can be understood as trying to make converts even when you're twisting people's arms, almost as if you're checking off one more convert. Whereas Pope Francis was always saying that we've got to propose our faith in such an attractive way that it's going to engage another person's freedom to say, I want what that person wants. Please show me how I can open myself up to that gift.
And very quickly, I know it's an application in some ways of Pope Benedict's constant refrain too of we have to invite people to have an encounter. Of course, building on Luigi Giussani.
And he was so inviting. Pope Francis, and we can see that outside in St. Peter's Basilica. We're going to see so many pilgrims coming to say goodbye to Pope Francis. Let's talk to them. Let's see.
It took me 2 hours and 15 minutes to go into the basilica, and in that process I was able to see the faith of the people, and I united with them. As we waited, there was prayers of the rosary, songs being sung, and we all joined in. As we got closer to the body of our Holy Father, it was very emotional to see him, but so grateful for all the great things he did for the community, bringing people together. And my personal prayer was that now he intercede for the next Peter to come, so that the next Peter can lead us where the Lord desires us to go.
Crowds are just packed. Everyone's kind of packed like sardines, but also just very friendly and praying as they're going in. And even to go through the holy doors during a jubilee, for a lot of folks, this is their only time being able to go. So you could feel how special that was for everyone. So it was crowded, but overall it was beautiful and just a really nice chance to say goodbye to Pope Francis.
Pope Francis was an amazing person, an amazing Pope. He was part of my life as a Catholic. And when I received the news, I just had 5 minutes to cry, and then I decided to change my plans. Of course, many teenagers and young people were expecting to be here for the canonization of Carla Cutis, that we still don't know where it's going to happen. However, it's also important for us to be here with our Pope Francis. So I changed my plans, but I mean, it's a mix of feelings. I'm sad, but at the same time, I'm happy to be here in this special moment.
Él le dio mucha importancia y mucho valor.
He gave great importance and great value to the family environment. And so in that same family spirit, I wanted to go and say, thank you, Holy Father. Thank you for all the good. Thank you for the gift that was your person. Thank you for giving yourself completely to humanity and for giving us so many teachings. That was what I wanted to do. I felt sadness, emptiness, but at the same time, joy in knowing that up in heaven, we now have an extraordinary man interceding for us.
Isn't that such a proof that Pope Francis had this one-to-one relationship with so many people? Most of those people probably didn't meet him at all, but they had this one-to-one relationship. Why do you think this happens?
There is a charism of the papacy. There is a divine gift that's given so that people are able to sense what he used to always call in Spanish cercanía, this proximity, this nearness to everyone, so that even though they may not have met him personally, they all related to him as a Holy Father in faith. And that's one of the reasons why, as the young woman was just explaining to us, she desired to change all her plans in order to be able to be here in Rome, to be with the Holy Father, as we are entrusting him back to the God who gave him to us.
But you said, too, there's an aspect of the charism of the papacy, that the Pope isn't merely a charismatic figure. You know, you could argue that John Paul II was a massively charismatic figure. He was a colossus on the world stage. Pope Benedict XVI was much more shy. He was professorial. Benedict was somebody who did not clearly like the limelight that much, but here he was as the Pope, and yet he had also that very close connection with people. At his funeral here a couple of years ago, people were weeping, and he had been out of the papacy for, 10 years. Francis had an earthiness about him. He was like a grandfather, certainly, but there was this rustic quality to him that he brought with him from Argentina that I think people connected with. But you can see that connection, especially in his travels. I think of places like to the Central African Republic, war zones in Sudan, great areas of difficulty in Myanmar and elsewhere. He was, despite his age, absolutely fearless in the places he went, and I think people saw that and respected it.
And I think he thought of himself as one more young people, one of the youth. Do you think this is reflected in Christus Vivit?
So certainly, Christus Vivit was the exhortation, the document he wrote after a synod on young people. The church was looking to the question of how we can more effectively transmit the fullness of our faith to younger generations so that it can transform them and so that they can pick up their responsibilities in the church of bringing the gospel to the ends of the earth. And so after that very encouraging synod, he wrote this document in which, among other things, he lifted Carlo Acutis up to the attention of everybody as a young person who used digital media, used his capacity to design websites in order to be able to share faith in Christ in the Eucharist, love for the Blessed Mother, love for the four last things, and gratitude to the Lord for the gift of heaven, angels and saints, you name it. Carlo was doing it all. And so Pope Francis wanted to show in that document how Christ is alive. He brings us more fully alive. And as we get to know Christ better, we go back to Psalm 42, which used to be said by every priest before Mass, that he was going up to the altar of God, to the God who rejuvenates him, who brings joy to his youth. Every time we grow closer to the Lord Jesus, especially in the Eucharist, we get younger, which when you're as old as Matthew Bunsen is really consoling.
I'll take all the consolation I can get. You can add to that the description that Christ is also relevant. That in an era in which we have the rise of the nuns, the NONESs, in which there seems to be a heightened level of disaffiliation among young people, though that has now flattened, it's plateaued, thank heavens, and we're seeing an increase, in fact, among Gen Zs. But Francis was the oddest, seemingly, prophet or spokesperson to proclaim the relevance of Christ and his teachings to young people. I mean, he was an old person. He talked about that himself. But we also discussed yesterday about the bridge building that he did between the generations, and that's certainly something that he tried. But he would sit with young people, and I mentioned he was fearless. He would go and meet with young people. I think especially of the somewhat controversial, but important to track in the history of Francis, the Disney sit-down interview that he did with young people.
Viral.
In which he took on the most challenging questions they could throw at him. And in a generation, and several generations now, in which things like abortion, you either steer away from them because you're not supposed to talk about it, or you couch it in terms that are safe or euphemistic. He used some of the most searing language of his pontificate in calling it murder. In calling it that you're hiring an assassin. It is, you're hiring murderers with white gloves. Language that went right to the young people who had heard for years these euphemisms about reproductive health care and things. No, Francis cut right through all of those euphemisms and called it what it is. So there was a plain speakingness about him, I think. And you can see that in Christus Vivit, that Francis understood the task that was ahead for the church, and I think it's one of the reasons why he worked so hard on that particular one coming out of the synod.
Now that we're giving this walk, this overlook of his documents, I was thinking if Evangelii Gaudium was a blueprint for his pontificate, what about Dilexit Nos? Was that a full circle moment? Was that a way for him to say goodbye somehow?
I'm not so sure it was intended as his goodbye, as his valedictory document, but it was reinforcing for sure the main themes of Evangelii Gaudium. When he turned the entire church to focus on Jesus, and particularly the love that beats in Jesus' heart for us, and how that's supposed to transform our heart, that's just another way of saying what he had first given us in Evangelii Gaudium. Likewise, the document on the Sacred Heart, Dilexit Nos, which means he loved us, Jesus loved us and gave his life up for us. That whole document finishes on mission. That once we really have a synchrony between our heartbeats and Jesus' heartbeats, then we need to take others out to be transformed by the love that flows in that heart. And so for me, as the head of the Pontifical Mission Society in the U.S., to be able to have so many paragraphs dedicated to the church's mission and how we see Jesus' heart crowned with thorns and on fire, that fire is supposed to ignite us so that we can go light the whole world ablaze.
The timing of Dilexit Nos has to be remarked on, because he dropped it right in the last week of the Synod on Synodality as it was concluding its work. And the observation was made that it was almost as though he was trying to give a document that would give heart to the work of the Synod. And in that document is a reminder that we have to be so careful of being trapped by processes and bureaucracies that we lose our heart. And it was as though he was reminding the Synod that here we are having these discussions about processes in the church, the process of synodality and how we implement it. But let's not forget who we're called to be and what we're called to be, which are saints. So also in some ways I connect Dilexit Nos very closely with Gaudete et Exultate, his reflection on this kind of universal call to holiness.
2018,
exactly.
From the middle of his pontificate.
Exactly. So it's a combination of these two documents. If we pair them, we see this universal call to holiness that he wants for everyone in the modern world. But then he's also reminding us what has to be at the heart of it, and that has to be Christ, it has to be the Eucharist.
Some of the insights from the document on the Sacred Heart that I don't think we should lose, because they're really going to last way beyond Pope Francis' pontificate to nourish the Church, is that when we venerate Jesus' Sacred Heart, we're not essentially focused on a body part. That the heart is symbolic of who Jesus is and his humanity and his love for us. That's the first point. But the second point is we're now marking the 350th anniversary of when Jesus revealed his Sacred Heart to St. Margaret Mary Alacoque in Paray-le-Monial, France. And there's one passage in there when Jesus pointed to his heart, crowned with thorns and on fire, and he said, "Behold the heart that has so much loved the human race, that it has exhausted itself, pouring itself out in testimony of its love. But from most," he went on, "I receive only indifference, irreverence, coldness, sacrilege, and scorn for me in the sacrament of love," which means the Holy Eucharist, the Sacramentum Caritatis. And he said, what pains me most keenly is that those consecrated to me in baptism, in the priesthood, in the more intimate form of baptismal consecration we call religious life, what pains me most acutely is that people consecrated to me treat me this way. And so Pope Francis cites that passage that Jesus himself gave to St. Margaret Mary as a thing to get the whole church to wake up and begin to examine, do I really love Jesus? He loved me enough to be crucified for me. Do I sacrifice for him? Do I make the time for him in prayer? Do I make the time to go greet him in the distressing disguise of the poor, to use Mother Teresa's phrase? Do I try to learn what he's taught so that I can become an effective herald of this life-changing and life-saving news? So Pope Francis was going on out with a dramatic, bold, 96-point exclamation of everything that he's lived for 12 years as Pope, as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, as a Jesuit priest, even as a disciple of Jesus. Because when you really want to look at Pope Francis, he was someone who, looking at the heart of Jesus, was willing to give all in return.
And he also said the world has lost its heart, and he was referring to different conflicts. Why do you think he kept insisting on these things?
Well, because in these conflicts, in so many cases, the world has lost not just its heart, but its very humanity. That in these conflicts that we have lost an ability to see God, to see the face of Christ in others. But the thing with the Dilexit Nos, the thing with Gaudete et Exultate, is also Francis was unabashed in his love of pious devotions. Simple prayers, simple devotions that at times seem almost primitive to the eyes of the modern world, but we talked about him always going back to the essence of things. These pious devotions that he grew up with, we can't underestimate as we assess his life, his growing up in Argentina, the impact, for example, of women on his life, especially the elderly women in his life.
Well, even his grandma.
His grandmother was his great hero.
Right.
He always had what she wrote him in his breviary. So at the same time that he'd read the words of God and pray them, he'd read the words of his grandmother. He had a communist female boss. He had a nurse who overruled the doctors to save his life. He was constantly talking about these women, which is, I think, one of the sources of his extraordinary love for Our Lady, because he was able to see some of her mirroring attributes in these women who are described.
And do you think we can see in these documents we're talking about something that points us to his regards for the role of women in church? Can we see this in Evangelii Gaudium? Can we?
Well, in Gaudete et Exsultate, his document on holiness in the modern world, he underlined very much that the most important hierarchy of them all is the hierarchy of holiness, at the top of which stands a woman, the daughter of Joachim and Anne, the mother of Jesus Christ, the mother of God, that Mary is the one who shows us best how to be a disciple of the blessed fruit of her womb, how to be an apostle, how to be a spiritual parent of anybody else, a spiritual mom or a dad, but likewise, somebody who can be an intercessor for others, somebody who can be a mama bear, an incredible advocate. So Pope Francis, in that document on holiness, was encouraging us to become like the saints next door, regardless of our profession, regardless of our education, etc. But at the top of all of the great saints who have lived, known and unknown, stands this 14-year-old girl whose yes changed human and salvation history, Mary.
But Francis's understanding of women, he talked frequently about women, but contrary to the desires of many progressive Catholics, for example, or certainly many in the secular media, he understood the proper role. He understood, one of the reasons I think that he was so adamantly opposed to things like gender ideology that blended and blurred the lines and the differences biologically, ontologically between men and women. But the role of women for him also had clarity in what he was not willing to do. I go back to that interview that he did with Nora
60
O'Donnell
Minutes.
on 60
Yes.
Minutes about CBS, when she said, well, she just assumed that he would say yes. When she said, well, what about a young girl who wants to become a deacon or ordained? And he said, if you're talking about holy orders, no. It was just as firm as it could be, because he understood what was correct and what had to be by reality in the created order. So Francis then did not have, he may have had this great love of pious devotions, but it wasn't some blurring in his mind of the proper role of women and the relationship between men and women.
And yet he did insist on studying this topic in the Synod, didn't he?
He absolutely did, because his whole approach to synodality was to engage the questions that people have. And the walk that we're supposed to do is a dialogue with a direction. In one of his encyclicals, Fratelli Tutti, that we're all brothers and sisters, he has a whole chapter on the meaning of dialogue. And it's one of the least understood parts of Pope Francis's pontificate, because many people think that when they hear the word dialogue, let's just talk and share and get out the guitars and sing Kumbaya together and the rest of it. And he said, no, when you look at dialogos in Greek, it means a conversation toward something. Dia is pointing us in a direction. And what is that direction? Ultimately toward the truth, in which we discover that the truth has a capital T and is a proper name, Jesus Christ, who incarnates the truth and is the only truth that sets us free. And so the dialogue that the church takes, the synodal journey, is ultimately meant to be a walk not just in any direction we set, but a walk in the bloody footsteps of Jesus Christ up the narrow way, all the way to life eternal, which we now pray Pope Francis is experiencing.
And I think we should not forget Amoris Laetitia. I have a special fondness to it because it was one of the texts my husband and I studied before getting married. And we always remember love is patient, love is kind, which he elaborates further in this document. How would you summarize, or what would you highlight from this document?
Well, one aspect, of course, immense controversy has surrounded Amoris Laetitia since it was promulgated as part of his post-synodal apostolic exhortation on the Synod on the Family. We think, of course, chapter 8 of Amoris. But when we also look at the wider context of Amoris coming out of this Synod, but then Francis's reflection on family life, the challenges that it faces today in the modern world, and how do we respond to that with mercy and compassion. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of it. The one thing, too, about Amoris that became very familiar to those of us who followed Francis, because we can see it again in another post-synodal apostolic exhortation, that's Carita Amazonia, that Francis would be given these final reports by synods, these bodies, which would have proposals and other things. But then he would take it, as a pope would, and reflect on it. And he might go in an entirely different direction. I think of Carita Amazonia, which wasn't an outright rejection of the work of the Amazonian Synod, but he left essentially on the table many of the proposals they were making and went back to Aparecida as the guiding principle for what has to happen in South America, in particular in the Amazonian region. So it was Francis not feeling compelled to be bound by this, by the work, and you can see that too in Amoris Laetitia, where there were certainly controversial discussions at the Synod, but Francis chose to implement it in a way that was uniquely his.
Chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia, which means the joy of human love, sometimes sucks up all the oxygen because of its ambiguous wording with regard to whether those who are divorced and remarried can receive Holy Communion.
The dreaded footnotes.
But the beginning of that document was a real summary of St. John Paul II's Theology of the Body, his beautiful 1981 document on the family called Familiaris Consortio, his letter to families. It was a beautiful representation of the extraordinary gift of family life in God's plans. That when we look at who we are as God's image, it's not just that we are able to think and choose like God can think and choose. It's not just that we're sons of God in the Son, but that we're made male and female, meant to live in communion with each other because we are in the image of a triune God. And what do we see in God? Two of the persons, Father and Son, can love each other in such an intense way that their love can eternally generate a third person, the Holy Spirit. And what do we see in the image? Male and female, God made them, that their love can be so strong that their love can generate a third person, a fruit of their love, the love they've literally made, who is a sign of their communion and a means by which their love and communion can grow as they sacrifice themselves for their children and for each other to pass on the gift of love that they've received. That's where Amoris Laetitia began, and that is a crucial part of the gospel. St. John Paul II said, and Pope Francis reiterated, that the future of humanity passes by way of the family. 99% of the Christian disciples that the Lord has sent 2 by 2 to evangelize the whole world are wearing beautiful wedding rings, just like you are. Going out hand in hand as a couple to show that Christianity is ultimately all about love. And we're grateful for Pope Francis's reiteration of that truth that comes from the first chapter in sacred scripture.
That is beautiful. Thank you, Father Landry. I see this is very close to your heart as well. We have seen this personal ability for Francis to speak to each person, and I think he was great with kids as well, wasn't he? We're gonna take you back to some of the greatest memories of Pope Francis and kids. And we just saw some beautiful images from Pope Francis and the kids, but I would love to highlight one of those. Do you remember this moment when an Italian kid came to him and he had lost his father and he said, "Is my dad in heaven?" Do you remember that moment?
I do vaguely, but I'm sure Dr. Bunsen remembers it better.
Well, it was a child who talked about his father was an atheist, and there was some controversy, and we use that word a lot where Pope Francis has been concerned, and that it's subject to more conversation, of course.
Absolutely.
But Francis gave an answer, basically, is he in heaven? And he kind of basically said yes. Now, it's controversial, but it was also a demonstration, I think, of the way that Pope Francis would try to teach in a way that didn't complicate things when you're trying to give consolation and mercy to somebody.
It's always important to know what questions really being asked, which goes beyond the words. And the young boy was asking, should I have hope about my father? And Pope Francis was saying, absolutely, you should have hope. And the reason why Pope Francis was able to say that was because he recognizes that Jesus Christ loved that little boy's dad way more than all the parents who have ever lived have loved their children. And because of that love, we can always have hope, even in somewhat desperate circumstances. And so Pope Francis gave that in a way before the boy is really going to be able to understand theological distinctions, that we don't judge anybody, even in a positive direction. We certainly don't condemn, but we don't immediately canonize people. But at the same time, we have hope for everybody because Jesus Christ willed that all be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And so he's at least going to offer some opportunity for someone to be able to accept that incredible treasure.
And I think Francis understood sort of instinctively that the question that he was answering, you said that it was a question that sort of went beyond the one that was being asked. Francis understood that any answer he was given was also going to be for the much bigger world out there, at a time when there are questions everywhere about God. Can we believe? Should we believe? Francis was offering hope, as you said, hope to a world that doesn't have it, that sometimes rejects God out of rage, out of ignorance, out of despair. And Francis's constant recourse to mercy, I think, was tied to that.
I was struck by the video of how many times Pope Francis just kissed kids all around the world, that more than saying something, he was expressing with his lips another message, which was not just that the Pope loves these individual kids with that gesture of a kiss, but that God, through Pope Francis, is loving those kids. Back here behind us, you see the papal apartments, and it was on the vigil of the Second Vatican Council that St. John the 23rd came out of that window in the library, and he gave a discourse at night, and he basically asked all those present to go home and kiss their children and let them know that Papa Giovanni, that Pope John the 23rd, loves them. And ever since he did that, it changed the papacy. St. John Paul II, everywhere he went, similarly kissed children. And so Pope Francis was proclaiming the gospel by that kiss. Everybody recognized that the Pope is a sign of God's presence in the world, but not just his presence, because God in the world is loving us still.
You mentioned an element that I think is so important, which is mercy. Why was mercy so important for Pope Francis? Where is this coming from?
Because he encountered it in his own life. We have talked about, and I'm sure we'll talk more about Francis's own profound conversion in this moment of he'd gone to confession. He was impelled to go to confession when he had this call to the priesthood. But he kept coming back to this image of Christ calling, the call of St. Matthew, the painting by Caravaggio, the reflection of the venerable bead on that call, with mercy chosen. Miserando atque eligendo. With the eyes of mercy, Christ called. So Francis himself had that personal encounter with mercy in his own life and then wanted to bring it to everyone else. That didn't mean that you simply ignore the teachings of the Church. Rather, there is the power of the sacraments, and there is God's loving mercy. It's why he said from the start of his pontificate that no matter how many times you fall, God will be there to pick you up. Christ is there to pick you up. It wasn't just an oblique reference of some vague deity picking you up. It was, in fact, I think, also a reference to the power of confession.
So, to just give a little color to help all of us get to know Pope Francis better, he was a 16-year-old kid when this happened, a couple months short of his 17th birthday. It was September 21st, 1953, which is the first day of spring in the southern hemisphere, first day of fall in the northern hemisphere. It's a day off from school in Argentina. And he was going to go to the train station and go for a
the
picnic.
Feast of St. Matthew, right?
Yeah, Feast of St. Matthew, the evangelist, kick a soccer ball around and eat and enjoy some company with friends. But he just wanted to make a short little stop at the church dedicated to St. Joseph in his region of Buenos Aires. And he knelt there and he saw a priest he had never recognized before, Father Carlos Duarte Ibarra, walking around in his cassock. And he felt something spontaneous within him saying, I'm just going to go up and ask him to hear my confession. They went into the confessional. 5 minutes later, young Jorge Bergoglio left, not just with his plans for the day changed, but for the plans for his life. He had entered that confessional thinking that he would become a chemist after he graduated high school and university, but he left wanting to be able to spread throughout the world the mercy he had received. And he said that what happened in that confessional almost exceeds words, but he made up a Spanish word to describe it. He said it was the experience of primeriar, which he tried to translate as God beat me to it. I thought I was the one making the choice to go to confession. And finally, when I got in there, I recognized God had been waiting for me and waiting for me with mercy. We talked yesterday about how he self-identified. Who is Jorge Mario Bergoglio, he was asked. And he said, I am a sinner, but a sinner Jesus is looked upon with love. And because he always saw Jesus looking at him with merciful love, that's what we were just talking about with St. Bede's commentary on St. Matthew, he couldn't help but describe that merciful Jesus to all of us. And that's why I think it's a particular gift that he was called home by that merciful Lord on the fourth day of the novena to divine mercy, that even in his death, Jesus was proclaiming through Pope Francis the mercy that not only called him to follow in his merciful footsteps, but who's calling us too.
And what have we seen in his papacy that has helped us further understand the sacraments of penitence?
Please ask the question one more time.
What have we seen, just what you were saying, how we've seen mercy in this moment where Dios te primerea, God is the first one. So I was thinking, is it possible that during his teachings, during his papacy, he has been able to reinforce what confession is, what the sacrament entails?
So the first thing he did was declare a Jubilee of Mercy, an extraordinary Jubilee year from December 8th, 2015, through the end of 2016, November 20th, 2016, in which he encouraged everybody to open themselves up to the mercy of the Lord. He chose 1,100 priests throughout the world to give his faculties to heal the censures due to the worst of sins, desecration of the Eucharist, breaking the seal of confession, trying to assassinate or beat up the Holy Father. I was honored to be one of those 1,100 priests, given the Pope's capacities in the Sacrament of Confession, to be able to make mercy accessible to everyone. And he gave us a particular commission to preach mercy, to get calluses on our behind, hearing confessions from dawn to dusk, and also to be catalysts of the corporal and the spiritual works of mercy. After that Jubilee of Mercy was completed, he surprised us all by saying, we're going to extend the mandate of the Missionaries of Mercy. And then finally, when he gave a new apostolic constitution for the church, which he phrased preaching the gospel, predicati evangelium, he put the Missionaries of Mercy into the very structure of the church. So for the rest of my priesthood, I am going to be carrying on Pope Francis's agenda of mercy in the middle of the world. And I think that over everything, as I wrote in a column for the National Catholic Register on Monday, the day that Pope Francis died, the ultimate lesson of his papacy is God's mercy is real.
And right now, the line is about 5 to 6, maybe 7 hours to get into St. Peter's Basilica to say farewell to Pope Francis. And as we were listening to those pilgrims who are in line today to say farewell to him, one of the things that, and you can see right now that line in St. Peter's Basilica.
Yes, and that is a live feed.
This
It's
is
in
the
live image.
procession of Catholics, of Christians, and many people of goodwill coming to say farewell to Pope Francis. I dare say that many of them were touched in some fashion by Pope Francis's call for mercy. And he touched their lives in a way that has impelled them to stand in line now for hours to say goodbye to him.
I'd love to tell a personal story about that. At the beginning of his pontificate, 8 straight flights. I always sit next to the window, and there was generally 1 or 2 people sitting next to me. They'd see me dressed as a priest on a flight and ask, "Are you a Catholic priest?" "Yes." "Well, I just love the new Pope." "I do too. What do you love about him?" "Well, I love about the fact that he's merciful and everything else like this." And I said, "How much do you love the fact that he preaches about mercy?" A lot. "What does that mean?" "Well," I said, "when he became Pope, he said that he wants all of us to open ourselves up to receive that mercy through the sacrament of confession." And they'd pause. And 8 straight flights, the person next to me said, "Is it even possible to go to confession on a plane?" And I said, "Of course it is. But it's been so long since I went to confession." And I said, "Don't worry, I always carry with me one of these examination of conscience sheets and how to go to confession." And I'd give it to him. 10 minutes later, I'd put on a purple stole on the plane, and they'd whisper their confessions to me. That's how impactful Pope Francis's living out of that message of mercy was, that total strangers on a plane seeing a priest they don't know would do for me what he did for Carlos Duarte Ibarra, that Salesian priest, on September 21st, 1953, and ask for the gift of God's mercy, having no idea that God's mercy preceded them on the plane.
And when we started this whole conversation tonight with the concept, the ideal of humility, and Pope Francis is reminding us that we have to be humble before our God, that we have to have that humility. Pride, Francis talked about it, pride is a terrible sin, perhaps the greatest sin, as he said it, that our pride prevents us from going to confession, and the mercy of God is there. And today we had the translation of Pope Francis, the movement of his remains from the Casa Santa Marta to St. Peter's Basilica, where they are going to be lying in state for the next couple of days. And running through this entire liturgy today was the call, the plea for God's mercy for all of us, but today in particular for Jorge Mario Bergoglio. As he said, he is a poor sinner, but he gave his life for God's mercy, and now we can ask God to be merciful to him.
As we are wrapping up our coverage, we go through what we've seen today. What are we expecting for the next days?
We're expecting what we're seeing right now, the continued prayer of the church for him as we individually go up. That's not a photo opportunity. That's just like Catholics are accustomed to going to wakes, where you draw close to the mortal remains of somebody you've known and say a prayer, entrusting that person to the Lord. Pope Francis was always entrusting the needs of the entire church to his boss, Jesus Christ. And now we're doing the same for him, that the Lord look on him with mercy, so that Pope Francis will be able, with the beatific vision, to look on that merciful face of the Lord, staring at him for all eternity.
Matthew, what would you highlight from today's translation?
I would highlight that it's a reminder. We talked about it this morning. Don't waste these next few days. Continue to pray for Pope Francis. You know, all of our eyes are understandably focused on the funeral that's coming on Saturday morning. But Pope Francis is lying in state here. He's lying as all of us continue to pray for him. But let's also then pray for the church and pray for the cardinals who will have this momentous decision coming in the next days. Then we have the sealing of the casket of the coffin on Friday night by Cardinal Farrell, the Camerlengo, as all the preparations are completed then for the funeral. And then, of course, we have the funeral on Saturday morning, which the world is going to be watching. At the conclusion of that, we'll have the procession of some kind. I suspect it's going to be pretty monumental to see, through the streets of Rome, all the way to the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, where his tomb now is clearly in readiness to receive him. And we go back again to that concept of humility. It's going to be a simple slab with just the name Franciscus written on it. That's what he wanted, and that's how the church is going to honor him.
And with that, we come to an end today. Thank you for watching. We encourage you to visit our platforms, ewtn.com, catholicnewsagency.com. We are still mourning Pope Francis, so we also encourage you to pray for the soul of Pope Francis. Thank you so much, and God bless.